The crimson sand of Kepler 442b stretched endlessly under twin suns, broken only by jagged black rocks that jutted from the ground like broken teeth. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against one such formation, her breathing ragged as plasma bolts sizzled past her head. Her archaeological expedition had turned into a nightmare when the Zephyrian raiders attacked their dig site. "Stay down," shouted Commander Hayes through the comm, but his voice was growing weaker. Alina could see him 30 meters away, bleeding from multiple wounds, his rifle nearly empty. The rest of her team lay scattered across the excavation site, some moving, others terrifyingly still. The Zephyrians were methodical in their slaughter. These weren't the civilized merchants who traded with human colonies. These were the savage clans from the Outer Rim, known for taking prisoners only to sell them in the slave markets of the Vega system. Their chittering war cries echoed across the dig site as they advanced, their insectoid forms moving with predatory grace. Alina clutched her geological scanner, wishing she had paid more attention during the mandatory combat training at the academy. She was a xenoarchaeologist, not a soldier. Her expertise lay in ancient civilizations, not in staying alive when those civilizations' descendants came hunting. A shadow fell across her hiding spot. She looked up to see a Zephyrian warrior towering above her, its compound eyes glittering with malicious intelligence. The creature's mandibles clicked as it raised its plasma rifle, savoring the moment before the kill. Then something massive crashed into the raider from the side. Alina gasped as she watched the Zephyrian fly through the air, landing with a sickening crack against a stone pillar. Where it had stood moments before was something she had never seen before. The figure was roughly humanoid but clearly alien, standing nearly 8 feet tall with silver-blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the harsh sunlight. Intricate tattoos or markings covered its exposed arms and neck, pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow. The being wore armor that looked like it had been crafted by master artisans rather than mass-produced in factories. Flowing robes of deep purple hung beneath the armor plates, and an ornate helmet covered most of its face, leaving only piercing golden eyes visible. In its hands was a weapon unlike anything Alina had ever seen, part staff, part blade, crackling with energy that made the air itself hum. But what struck her most was that the warrior was wounded, badly wounded. Purple blood seeped from multiple gashes across its torso, and one arm hung at an odd angle. Yet it moved with fluid grace, spinning its weapon in complex patterns as more Zephyrians converged on their position. The battle that followed was unlike anything Alina had witnessed. The mysterious warrior fought like a force of nature, its weapon leaving trails of energy as it carved through the Zephyrian ranks. But for every raider that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. The warrior was clearly weakening, its movements becoming slower, more labored. Alina watched in horror as a Zephyrian managed to slip past the warrior's guard, its claws raking across the being's back. The warrior stumbled, going down on one knee. The remaining raiders circled like vultures, clicking and chittering in their alien language. Something inside Alina snapped. Maybe it was seeing someone fight so bravely to protect strangers. Maybe it was the realization that they were all going to die anyway. Or maybe it was just basic human decency refusing to let a hero fall alone. She grabbed her emergency flare gun and stepped out from behind her cover. "Hey, bug faces!" she shouted, firing the bright flare directly into the face of the nearest Zephyrian. The creature shrieked and stumbled backward, clawing at its eyes. The distraction was exactly what the warrior needed. With renewed strength, it surged to its feet, weapon spinning in a deadly arc that caught 2 raiders across their midsections. The remaining Zephyrians, suddenly finding themselves outnumbered by their own dead, began to retreat toward their ships. Alina ran to the fallen warrior as the sound of Zephyrian engines faded into the distance. Up close, she could see that the being was in even worse shape than she had thought. The purple blood was flowing freely now, and the golden eyes were growing dim. "Hey, stay with me," Alina said, kneeling beside the warrior. She had basic medical training, but she had no idea if human techniques would work on alien physiology. Still, she had to try. The warrior's helmet had been damaged in the fight, and through the cracks, Alina caught glimpses of aristocratic features that were almost human-like, except for the silver-blue skin and those extraordinary golden eyes. When the being tried to speak, its voice was deep and resonant, but the words were in a language she didn't recognize. "I don't understand," Alina said, frustrated. She pulled out her portable medical kit and began examining the wounds. The warrior's armor was incredibly sophisticated, with built-in medical sensors that were flashing urgent warnings in symbols she couldn't read. The warrior reached up with its good arm and touched something on its chest plate. Suddenly, Alina could understand its words. "Why did you help me?" the warrior asked, its voice now translated through some kind of universal communicator. There was genuine confusion in its tone, as if the concept was foreign. Because it was the right thing to do, Alina said simply, applying pressure to the worst of the bleeding wounds. Because you were fighting to protect us, and because leaving someone to die when you can help is just wrong. The warrior stared at her for a long moment, those golden eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. What is your name, small one? Alina, Dr. Alina Vasquez. And you're not that much bigger than me when you're lying down, so let's skip the small one thing. To her surprise, the warrior made a sound that might have been laughter. I am Keltharius of House Valdris, fourth prince of the Asteran Empire. Despite its weakened state, there was unmistakable nobility in its bearing, and I am in your debt. Alina continued working on the wounds, using everything she had learned in first aid training and hopping for the best. The warrior's physiology was close enough to human that she could identify major blood vessels and organs, though everything was shifted slightly and colored differently. Don't mention it, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Though I have to ask, what's an Asteran prince doing on a backwater dig site in the middle of nowhere? Keltharius was quiet for a moment, and Alina thought he might have lost consciousness. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with pain and something else. Shame, maybe. I was exiled, he said finally. Stripped of rank and title, cast out from my father's house. I have wandered the outer systems for 3 cycles, seeking a way to redeem myself. When I detected the Zephyrian attack, I thought perhaps. He trailed off, but Alina understood. He had thought perhaps dying heroically might restore his honor somehow. Well, you're not dying on my watch, Alina said firmly, injecting him with a broad-spectrum antibiotic that she hoped wouldn't poison him. And for what it's worth, you fought like someone worthy of a crown, exile or not. Keltharius's eyes widened slightly at her words, and something shifted in his expression. In the distance, Alina could hear the sound of approaching engines. Human engines this time, the cavalry was finally arriving. I will not forget this kindness, Keltharius said, his voice growing stronger despite his wounds. By the ancient codes, I swear it, what you have done today will echo through the ages. Alina smiled, checking his pulse. It was steady now, though still weak. Just focus on getting better, though I have to say your empire has pretty dramatic ways of saying thank you. As the rescue ships landed and medics rushed toward them, Alina found herself looking into those golden eyes one last time. There was something there now that hadn't been before. Purpose, maybe, or determination. She had no way of knowing that she had just saved the life of someone who would one day rule half the known galaxy, or that her simple act of compassion would reshape the political landscape of dozens of star systems. All she knew was that she had done what felt right. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. 5 years had passed since the incident on Kepler 442b, and Dr. Alina Vasquez had almost convinced herself it had been a dream. Almost. The scars on her hands from the medical equipment she had improvised that day were real enough, as were the nightmares that still occasionally woke her in the middle of the night. She had returned to her work, throwing herself into research with renewed passion. Her published papers on precontact civilizations had earned her recognition throughout the academic community, and she now led the xenoarchaeology department at the prestigious Titan University. Life was good, quiet, and predictable, which made the morning when Admiral Chen appeared at her office door all the more jarring. Dr. Vasquez, the admiral was a stern woman with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. Behind her stood 2 Marines in dress uniform and a civilian Alina didn't recognize. I'm Admiral Sarah Chen, United Colonies Fleet Command. We need to talk. Alina set down her coffee, noting how the admiral's hand rested casually near her sidearm. This wasn't a social visit. So about what, admirals? About your encounter with Prince Keltharius 5 years ago, and about the fact that he's just been crowned Emperor of the Asteran Empire. Alina felt the blood drain from her face. Emperor, the wounded warrior she had bandaged with torn clothing and hope. I think you'd better sit down, Admiral Chen continued, entering the office and closing the door behind her team. Because the new emperor has just declared humanity to be under the protection of the Asteran Empire. Every human colony, every ship, every citizen. And according to our intelligence, it's all because of what you did on that dig site. The next few hours passed in a blur of briefings and classified documents. Alina learned that the Asteran Empire was one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, controlling over 300 star systems. Their technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, their military virtually unstoppable. They had watched humanity's expansion into space with the same interest one might observe insects building a nest. Until 5 years ago, when an exiled prince had returned home with tales of a human who had risked her life to save a stranger. Keltharius spent 2 years recovering from his wounds, Admiral Chen explained, sliding a data pad across Alina's desk. During that time, he studied everything he could about human culture, human history, human nature. When his father died 3 years ago, Keltharius was welcomed back into the succession. He had proven himself worthy through combat and sacrifice. Alina stared at the images on the data pad. They showed Keltharius in full imperial regalia, standing before what looked like the largest gathering of beings she had ever seen. He looked older now, more regal, but she would have recognized those golden eyes anywhere. His first act as emperor, Admiral Chen continued, was to issue the Edict of Protection. Any species that attacks humanity now faces the full might of the Asteran Empire. Overnight, we went from being a minor spacefaring race to being untouchable. That's, Alina struggled to find words. That's insane, he barely knows us. He doesn't know if we deserve protection. According to our xenopsychologist, the civilian spoke for the first time, Asteran culture places enormous value on personal honor and debt. By saving his life, you created a bond that, in their society, extends to your entire species. It's unprecedented but culturally consistent. Alina stood up and walked to her office window, looking out at the bustling campus below. Students from a dozen different worlds walked the paths, part of the growing galactic community that humanity was slowly joining. The thought that their safety might depend on her split-second decision to help a wounded stranger was overwhelming. "There's more," Admiral Chen said quietly. "3 days ago, we received a formal invitation. The Emperor wishes to meet with you. He's offering to host you on Astara Prime for the ceremony of eternal gratitude." "What does that mean?" "We're not entirely sure. Asteran ceremonies are usually private affairs, but our cultural advisors think he intends to publicly acknowledge the debt he owes you. It would be the first time in recorded history that an Asteran emperor has honored an alien." Alina turned back to face the Admiral. "And if I refuse?" "That's your choice, but the Emperor specifically requested that the invitation be extended with no coercion. He said, and I quote, 'She who showed kindness to a stranger must choose her own path, as is the way of her people.'" Over the next week, Alina found herself the center of a media storm she never wanted. News outlets across human space were calling her everything from humanity's guardian angel to the woman who saved our species. The attention made her skin crawl, but the decision itself was surprisingly easy. She was curious. The scientist in her wanted to see Astara Prime, to witness a civilization that had mastered interstellar travel when humans were still figuring out agriculture. And if she was honest with herself, she wanted to see what had become of the wounded warrior she had helped. The journey to Astara Prime took 2 weeks aboard the fastest ship in the human fleet, escorted by an Asteran vessel that made their best technology look like a child's toy. Alina spent the time learning what she could about Asteran culture, and trying to prepare for meeting someone who had apparently become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. When they finally arrived at Astara Prime, Alina understood why the Asteran Empire had endured for millennia. The planet was a work of art, its cities flowing seamlessly into the natural landscape. Towers of living crystal reached toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to defy gravity. Gardens and waterfalls were integrated into every structure, creating an urban environment that felt more like paradise than a seat of galactic power. The Imperial Palace was beyond magnificent. It was carved from a single mountain, its halls and chambers following the natural contours of the rock while being enhanced with technology Alina couldn't begin to understand. Everything was designed on a scale meant to inspire awe, from the 100-foot-tall doors to the throne room with its ceiling that somehow showed a real-time view of the galaxy. And there, on a throne that looked like it had been grown rather than built, sat Emperor Keltharius. He had changed in 5 years. The wounds she had tended were gone, replaced by ritual scars that she suspected held deep meaning in his culture. He was broader now, more muscled, carrying the confidence of someone born to rule. The flowing robes had been replaced by armor that was both functional and beautiful, inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and move in the light. But his eyes were the same, those incredible golden eyes that had studied her face as she worked to save his life. Alina walked the length of the throne room, her human escort falling behind as protocol demanded she approach the Emperor alone. The assembled court watched in absolute silence. She could feel the weight of their attention, beings from dozens of species all witnessing this unprecedented moment. When she was 10 feet from the throne, Keltharius raised his hand and she stopped. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, sovereign and scientist, separated by a gulf of power and culture that should have been unbridgeable. Then Emperor Keltharius of the Asteran Empire stood up, descended the steps of his throne, and knelt before Dr. Alina Vasquez. The sound that went up from the assembled court was unlike anything Alina had ever heard. Gasps of shock, murmurs of disbelief, and something that might have been approval all mixed together in a wave of noise that echoed through the vast chamber. Rise, Alina said quickly, uncomfortable with the display. Please, your majesty, you don't need to. I kneel before the one who saved not just my life, but my soul, Keltharius said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. You taught me that true nobility lies not in birth or title, but in the choice to help others when nothing is gained by doing so. You showed me what it means to be worthy of the crown I now wear. He stood then, but his eyes never left her face. For 5 years I have studied your species, learned your history, observed your actions. I have seen humans risk everything to save strangers. I have watched you share resources with those who have nothing to give in return. I have witnessed acts of courage, compassion, and sacrifice that humble me. The emperor turned to address his court, his voice rising. Let it be recorded in the eternal archive that on this day, humanity is formally welcomed as the younger sibling of the Asteran Empire. Let any who would harm them face the consequence of harming our own blood. Let the stars themselves bear witness to the bond forged by one woman's kindness to a fallen warrior. Alina felt tears running down her cheeks as the implications hit her. Not just protection, but kinship. Not just an alliance, but adoption into one of the galaxy's most ancient and respected civilizations. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you do this for all of humanity because of what one person did? Keltharius smiled, and for a moment she saw not the Emperor but the wounded stranger she had helped on that distant dig site. Because, he said, if one human could show such kindness to an enemy, how much more compassionate must your entire species be? Because in saving one of us you revealed the true character of your people. And because, his voice grew softer, meant for her ears alone, I learned that day that true strength comes not from power or position, but from the courage to do what is right when no one is watching. The ceremony that followed lasted hours, with rituals and speeches that formally inducted humanity into the Asteran family of species. But Alina would remember most clearly the moment when Keltharius had knelt before her, acknowledging a debt that had somehow grown into something much greater. As the celebration continued around them, she realized that her simple act of compassion on Kepler 442b had done more than save one life. It had changed the destiny of two species, creating bonds that would last for generations to come. And in the golden eyes of the Emperor, she could still see the gratitude of the wounded warrior she had refused to let die alone. 25 years had passed since the ceremony of eternal gratitude, and the galaxy was not the same place. The Terran-Asteran alliance had become a beacon of cooperation and prosperity, with human colonies spreading throughout Asteran space and joint research stations pushing the boundaries of science and technology. Trade flowed freely between the species, cultural exchange programs brought young beings together to learn from each other, and the combined fleets had brought peace to regions that had known nothing but warfare for centuries. Dr. Alina Vasquez, now bearing the title of Cultural Ambassador Emeritus, stood on the observation deck of the research station orbiting Kepler 442b. The planet below looked different now. Where once there had been only archaeological ruins and empty desert, thriving cities dotted the surface. The dig site where she had first met Keltharius had been preserved as a memorial, but around it had grown new harmony, a joint human-Asteran settlement that served as a symbol of what their species could accomplish together. At 73, Alina moved more slowly than she once had, her hair now silver-white and her hands marked with age spots. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and her eyes still held the curiosity that had driven her to become a xenoarchaeologist in the first place. Ambassador, a young voice called from behind her. Alina turned to see Zara Chen, her graduate assistant, and one of the brightest minds she had ever encountered. The girl was half Asteran, half human, one of a growing number of hybrid children who represented the future of their alliance. The Emperor's ship has just entered the system, Zara reported. They'll be docking within the hour. Alina nodded, feeling a familiar flutter of nervousness. Even after all these years, even after dozens of meetings and collaborations, seeing Keltharius still reminded her of that day on the battlefield. He had kept his promise about never forgetting her kindness, but their relationship had evolved far beyond simple gratitude. They had become friends, advisors to each other, and partners in building a better galaxy. How does he look? Alina asked. Keltharius was nearing his 200th birthday, which for an Asteran was the equivalent of middle age, but the responsibilities of empire had taken their toll. Distinguished as always, Zara replied with a smile. Though he seemed tired during the transmission, the negotiations with the hegemony have been difficult. Alina sighed. The hegemony was a coalition of species that viewed the Terran-Asteran alliance with suspicion and hostility. They saw humanity's rapid rise to prominence as an affront to the natural order, and Emperor Keltharius's protection of human space had made him many enemies. Recent months had seen increased tensions, border skirmishes, and diplomatic incidents that threatened to spill over into open warfare. The docking bay was filled with ceremony and protocol as the imperial transport settled onto the landing platform. Asteran nobles in flowing robes stood alongside human dignitaries in their finest uniforms, creating a tableau of interspecies cooperation that would have been impossible 30 years ago. When the airlock opened and Emperor Keltharius emerged, Alina felt the same sense of awe she always experienced. He moved with the fluid grace of a born leader, his presence commanding respect from every being in the room. The armor had been replaced by formal robes for this diplomatic visit, but Alina could see the muscle and scars beneath the fabric that spoke of a ruler who still trained for battle. Their eyes met across the crowd and he smiled. Not the formal expression of an emperor greeting an ally, but the genuine warmth of an old friend seeing someone he cared about. He made his way through the reception line with practiced efficiency, exchanging pleasantries and conducting the necessary diplomatic dance, but Alina could see that his attention was focused on reaching her. "Alina," he said when they finally stood face to face. He took her hands in his, a gesture that would have scandalized the court 30 years ago but now seemed natural. "You look well." "For an old woman, you mean," Alina replied with a laugh. "You, on the other hand, haven't aged a day since I met you." "The burden of leadership ages the soul if not the body," Keltharius replied, and Alina could see the truth of that in his golden eyes. "Walk with me. There is much we need to discuss." They made their way to Alina's private quarters, leaving behind the crowd of officials and advisors. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, these moments of honest conversation away from the demands of their respective positions. Here, he wasn't the emperor and she wasn't the ambassador. They were just Kale and Alina, bound by shared history and mutual respect. "The hegemony grows bolder," Keltharius said without preamble as they settled into comfortable chairs overlooking the planet below. "3 more border incidents this month. They're testing our resolve." "And what does your council advise?" Alina asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "War," he said simply. "They believe the only way to end the hegemony's aggression is to demonstrate our strength decisively. They may be right." Alina studied his face, seeing the weight of the decision in his expression. "But you're not convinced." "I think of what you taught me on Kepler," he said quietly. "That the choice to help others, to show compassion even to strangers, is what separates civilization from barbarism. If I unleash the full power of the empire against the hegemony, millions will die. But if I don't, the hegemony will eventually force the war anyway," Alina finished, "probably on terms less favorable to us." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of New Harmony twinkle on the planet's surface as the local sun set. Finally, Alina spoke. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The decision to protect humanity, the alliance that's made you so many enemies." Keltharius was quiet for so long that Alina thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I regret the necessity of war. I regret the lives that will be lost in the conflicts to come. I regret that the galaxy cannot seem to find peace." He turned to look at her and his golden eyes were bright with conviction. "But I have never regretted honoring the debt I owe you. Never regretted the alliance that grew from your compassion. Never regretted the choice to see humanity as worthy of protection." Alina felt tears threatening to fall. "Even though it's made your rule more difficult, even though it's brought you enemies you wouldn't have had otherwise." "Alina," he said gently, "before I met you, I was an exile wandering the Outer Rim, seeking death as a path to redemption. You didn't just save my life that day. You showed me what life was worth living for. The alliance between our peoples, the peace we've brought to dozens of systems, the knowledge we've shared, the children like young Zara who represent our combined future. None of that would exist without your kindness to a wounded stranger." He stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture Alina had seen him make countless times during difficult decisions. "The hegemony sees our alliance as weakness," he continued. "They believe that compassion makes us soft, that our willingness to help others makes us vulnerable. They could not be more wrong. It is exactly that compassion, that willingness to sacrifice for others, that makes our alliance strong." Alina joined him at the window. Below them, the research station hummed with activity as beings from dozens of species worked together on projects that would benefit the entire galaxy. In the distance, she could see the lights of vessels from the joint fleet, human and Asteran ships working in perfect coordination to patrol the borders and maintain peace. "What will you do?" she asked. "What you taught me to do," Keltharius replied. "I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. I will stand against those who would harm the innocent. And I will remember that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the courage to preserve what is good in the universe." The next morning brought news that the hegemony had launched a massive assault on 3 human colonies simultaneously. The attacks were clearly coordinated. designed to test the alliance and force Keltharius to choose between protecting his own empire and honoring his commitment to humanity. Alina stood in the command center as reports flooded in. The attacks were devastating, but the response was swift and decisive. Asteran fleets moved with precision to defend the human colonies, while human vessels provided support and evacuation services for civilians. The coordination was flawless, the result of decades of joint training and shared purpose. But it was the smaller actions that moved Alina most. Individual Asteran ships breaking formation to rescue human survivors, human medical teams rushing into danger to treat Asteran wounded, beings who had never met each other risking their lives because they had learned to see each other as family. The hegemony wanted to test our resolve, Keltharius said, standing beside her as they watched the tactical displays. They wanted to see if the alliance was real or just political convenience. Alina watched as an Asteran destroyer sacrificed itself to protect a human evacuation ship, its crew dying to save beings they had never met. She saw human fighters diving into impossible odds to buy time for Asteran ground forces to retreat. She saw acts of courage and sacrifice that went far beyond any treaty or diplomatic agreement. "I think they have their answer," she said softly. The war that followed was brief but decisive. The hegemony had expected the alliance to fragment under pressure, had counted on ancient prejudices and cultural differences to tear apart the bonds between human and Asteran forces. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that fought not just for territory or resources, but for ideals. The combined fleets moved like a single organism, each species contributing their unique strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts. When the hegemony finally sued for peace, they did so not because they had been defeated in battle, but because they had been proven wrong about the nature of the alliance itself. They had attacked expecting to face a marriage of convenience. Instead, they had encountered a true union, forged not in boardrooms or council chambers, but in the choice of one person to help another in their moment of greatest need. Years later, when Alina was too old to travel between the stars, but still sharp enough to teach the next generation of diplomats and scholars, she would tell them about the day she met a wounded warrior on a distant planet. She would explain how a simple act of compassion had grown into an alliance that reshaped the galaxy. But what she remembered most was not the ceremonies or the treaties or the great historical moments. What she remembered was the look in Keltharius's golden eyes when he had first asked her why she helped him. The genuine confusion of someone who had never experienced kindness without expectation of reward. In the end, that was what had made all the difference. Not the advanced technology or the military might or the diplomatic protocols. It was the simple recognition that every being, no matter how alien or different, deserved compassion when they were hurt and alone. Alina's name would be remembered in the histories as the woman who saved humanity's greatest friend and forged an alliance that brought peace to the galaxy. Statues would be built in her honor, schools would bear her name, and children of a dozen species would learn about her courage on that long-ago battlefield. But the true monument to her legacy was something far greater than any statue or inscription. It was the galaxy itself, transformed by the simple truth that kindness to a stranger could echo through the ages and change the destiny of worlds. Emperor Keltharius never forgot the debt he owed to Dr. Alina Vasquez. But more than that, he never forgot the lesson she taught him about what it means to be truly worthy of power. And in the golden age of peace that followed, that lesson became the foundation upon which a better universe was built.